Grendel rushed through the flat, gathering all the things he felt he would need for the next few days. He'd packed a leather bag, but he was still searching for something. Milo watched with indifference. "Did you pack extra clothes?" he tried. Grendel paused, then shook his head. "Unnecessary," he replied as he began to lift their dresses. "Clothes are always necessary," Milo said, with the same concern a parent would have for a small child. He folded his arms. "What are you looking for, anyway?" He lifted the sofa from the floor, then set it down in disgust. "My sword." "Your knife?" Milo corrected him. "My sword," Grendel said with a quick glare. "It has to be around here somewhere." He glanced around the room as if it might jump out at him at any minute. Milo leaned against the doorframe. "It's a dagger at best," he said, the words rich with amusement. Grendel gave up and sat down upon the carpet with a pout. "Whatever you want to call it, I want it." "Why do you need it to go to see a show?" "I don't know. I just like having it with me when I travel." He fell flat on his back and slowly lifted the corner of the rug. Nope, not under there either. He knew he'd had it after Pompeii, but that was so many years ago. Milo left the room, and soon returned with Grendel's dagger. It was as long as his forearm, solid metal from tip to pommel, and held in a sturdy leather sheath that had grown dull with age. "Don't do anything stupid," he warned him. Grendel leapt up and took it from him, beaming with delight as he pulled the dagger from its sheath. The serrated blades, each one wicked in its own right, twisted around their center in a spiral. He turned it in his hands, watching the firelight reflect upon it like a shower of sparks. He nodded as he let it slide home into its sheath. "I'll see you in a few days, then." Milo said nothing, and Grendel was soon on his way. It was the last show of the year and the man still hadn't come. Richard stood front and center in his crisp white suit. The torchlight made his gaudy, sequined hat sparkle, and gave his red eyes a hellish glow. He scanned the room with half a mind on his act. The man had been to at least one of his shows each year, but Richard had yet to see him since their tour had begun in late spring. He would have known if the man was near. He always knew. He could feel him. Richard had known since the first time, 40 years ago, that the man wasn't human, and he'd reappeared every year since, looking not a day older. Truth be told, though, Richard hadn't aged much in those 40 years. Not the way a human should, anyway. What if something had happened to him? What if his apprehension had led Richard to miss his chance to speak to him? He felt the sweat trail down his neck. His gaze fell upon Molly as she galloped past for one more lap, standing tall upon the saddle with arms outstretched. Her soft, beautiful features were painted white, drawing out the darkness of her hair and coal-black lipstick. She'd painted a little red heart beneath one eye for a splash of color. In her white silk and lace she was the very image of a porcelain doll. It made her look more fragile than she really was. Both of them shared the same worry. Both had been able to hide it. To the audience they were nothing but happy and carefree, if a little strange. He'd mastered the art of faking the emotions he felt were necessary, and it had served him well. Most of his natural emotions went in line with those of the humans. Kindness and affection didn't come easily to him. One of his loves was now dead, a love affair gone wrong, and the other was riding a large white horse around him. He reached up to catch Molly as she hopped from the horse into his waiting embrace. He barely felt her hit his chest and nearly dropped her. A sudden shiver ran down his spine, making his hairs rise. Molly looked up at him curiously, berating him with her eyebrows for losing his focus. He swiftly set her feet upon the ground and leaned into her ear. "He's here," he whispered. "Look for him. I'm not letting him get away tonight." It wasn't just about Richard anymore. They shared a smile and Richard lifted her with both upon her hips, then shifted her to the palm of one hand and lifted Molly high above his head. She lifted a leg high and slowly spun in his hand, deaf to the audience's calls and applause, then hopped from his hand to land against him once more. She nodded toward the audience, eyes fixed to a point in the crowd. Richard followed her gaze. His hair always changed, but the face remained exactly the same, cherub cheeks, a button nose, and an ageless smile below strange golden eyes. His hair was chestnut brown this year, just long enough to tie into a small tail in the back. Grendel smiled as the pair watched him. His interest was piqued as he realized it wasn't just Richard keeping an eye on him that night. She changed things. She was all the proof he needed to confirm his suspicions about Richard. Part of him was sad. This night was the last time they would be able to play this game, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it to end. Richard and Molly took turns keeping an eye on him throughout the rest of the show. He would normally leave just before it ended, sliding out the second Richard took his eyes off him. He took note of the people around him, a young couple in front, and a family of 4 behind. It would take some time for them to file out. As soon as they took their final bow, Richard ducked out of sight and out the back of the tent, gesturing for Molly to head around the other way. The rain had left a chill in the air, and the thick mud made it hard to run. He set off at a quick trot to the front of the tent and watched the audience file out. In just a few minutes that felt like hours, the young couple emerged from the tent, and behind them, the family of 4. Richard's stomach lurched. The man was nowhere to be seen. A gentle touch on his arm made him jump. It was only Molly, staring up at him with a deep sadness in her eyes. She'd seen the pain written plainly across his face, he knew. Even he couldn't hide that. He pulled away and punched one of the wagons, deaf to the sharp crack of the splintering beam and the gaggle of gasps from the patrons still filing out from the circus tent. He crouched behind the wagon with his arms over his head. A scream of fury fought its way through his gritted teeth. Molly crouched beside him and wrapped him in her arms, draping herself over him. "It will be all right," she said softly. She lifted his eyes to meet hers. "You have gone this long without answers. I know you think you need to know these things, but you will be fine for now." He touched her cheek with the tips of his fingers. "I know," he said with a sigh. "I don't care about myself. I wanted to know, I need to know, now more than ever. Not for myself, Molly, but for you. I need to know what I am so I—" The words fell away before he could get them out. Richard sat, careless of the mud on his trousers, and pulled her onto his lap. He rested his head on her chest. "I need to know what I did to you.